welcome to the Young Turks. I'm Kasparian, and Cenk is not here because he's in Ohio for the debates, and he'll be checking in with us a little later in the show. But we have a wonderful panel, Nando, Vila, and Adrienne Lawrence join us today.
Hello.
And we'll have a different panel, of course, for the second hour. I'm really looking forward to today's show. There's a lot to cover. Later on in the second hour, we're gonna discuss LeBron James weighing in on all of this China versus Hong Kong stuff happening with the NBA. It has to do with free speech. It has to do with whether or not players know enough about the issue to share their opinions on social media. So we'll get into that discussion. And then, of course, we're gonna do a special debate coverage. Just wanna let you guys know, as the debate takes place, we are going to be watching, not live with you, but we're gonna be watching, researching, fact checking, and then we will go live at 8 p.m. Pacific time, 11 p.m. Eastern, to give you our thoughts and some of the highlights from that debate. So with that said, let's go ahead and move on to our first story of the day, and it's Syria. Let's take a look.
Turkey seized control of a key highway near the border in northeast Syria, meaning US troops in the area may have to rely on airlifts to get out. Stateside, President Trump's abrupt shift in policy has triggered a growing bipartisan backlash.
So Turkey's latest move in northern Syria has complicated the situation for US troops who are attempting to leave. And this is, of course, following Donald Trump's abrupt decision to abandon our Kurdish allies in the region and allow for Turkey to move forward with its military operation. Now, there's other news, including the involvement of Russia. But before we get to that, let me give you the details on what's going on in terms of Turkey's latest actions. Trump declared that Turkey's offensive undermines the campaign to defeat the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, endangers civilians, and further threatens to undermine the peace, security, and stability in the region. Now, part of the reason why US troops were in that region to begin with was to prevent all of these things from happening. Now that US troops are leaving, there are ISIS prisoners who are escaping the very prisons that our former Kurdish allies were keeping an eye on. Obviously, their priority now is to save themselves and to save their own lives as a result of this Turkish aggression. But the order that Donald Trump signed is in regard to sanctions. It's a $100 billion trade deal hammered out between Ankara and Washington, raises tariffs on Turkish steel to 50% and imposes sanctions on senior Turkish officials and the country's defense and energy ministries. So with that said, and before we move on to what Russia's doing, I wanted to kind of open this up to the panel and get your thoughts on it.
Well, I mean, it's a predictable consequence of Trump's decision to pull out of northern Syria. I mean, Turkey would not be doing any of this without the sort of tacit acquiescence of the United States. I think Erdogan himself was probably surprised that Trump agreed to do this move in the first place. It's one of those things that's, Trump himself is such an easy person to read in this sense because he's very obvious. Like he just says the thing openly, the thing that past US leaders would couch in sort of like humanitarian terms and sort of like slippery foreign policy speak. He just kind of outright says it. But this has been sort of a ongoing move the United States has done several times in the past. I mean, the Kurds are sort of a very easy pawn for the United States to sort of use in various different geopolitical chess matches, and the sort of playbook has always been the same exact thing. So this shouldn't come as too much of a surprise, but it's no less depressing and horrifying.
So can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by that? Because I agree with you that Trump isn't subtle as previous presidents have been. He says the quiet parts out loud. But what do you mean when you say that similar things have happened in the past?
Well, I mean, it's there's so many examples, it's almost impossible to go through them all right now. But I mean, whether it was in the early 90s or in the 1980s or in World War II, World War I, like the Kurds are kind of this perfect pawn for United States interests because they're a sort of stateless people that exist across various states where the United States has geopolitical interests. Some of them are our friends, some of them are our enemies. And at whatever point in time our enemies kind of need to be dealt with, we'll arm and support the Kurds, but then when our friends who also have to deal with Kurdish minorities within their own countries, whenever they get a little worried about sort of these uppity Kurds, then we'll abandon them. And that same exact dynamic has happened over and over and over again.
Yeah, and in this case, you have Turkey, a NATO ally, wanting to invade northern Syria, and then Donald Trump decides to abandon our Kurdish allies to make way for Turkey. Now, he has received so much backlash, and it's bipartisan backlash, that he's trying to make it appear as though he didn't intend for it to work out this way, that he didn't give a green light to this Turkish aggression, but he knew what was going on. I mean, in one of the original statements released by the White House, they specifically said, Trump told Erdogan, if you're gonna do like a mild military operation, we're gonna keep our troops there. But if you're gonna do an aggressive military operation, we're gonna pull our troops out. Yeah, that's letting Erdogan know, if you wanna go, if you wanna play, we'll play along with you and pull our troops out. I mean, anyway, Adrienne.
Well, this is very much on par for Donald Trump, essentially. Having him withdraw the troops from northern Syria, it really just undoes all the progress that's been done. And that's essentially what he's done here in the United States. This is his MO. This is what he does. He rolls things back so that anything that's been good, progressive, moving in the direction of stability is now unfolded, and we see how it plays out, and then pretending like, oop, I didn't know it was gonna happen. It's just, this is how this man operates.
Right, and he doesn't really strike me as someone who really has a plan or a strategy. It just really depends on the last person who spoke to him. And this is true of all of his policy, right? And so he has this conversation with Erdogan, and abruptly he decides, I'm gonna go ahead and abandon our Kurdish allies after they helped us fight ISIS. And keep in mind, those ISIS fighters were being watched by these Kurdish allies, now former Kurdish allies. And so again, they're escaping some of these prisons, which poses a danger. Like, what was the point? What was the point of trying to fight ISIS if you're gonna have Donald Trump, just undo all of the progress that was made there. Now, let's talk a little bit more about these sanctions, because some of our other allies have gotten involved. So NPR reports that US NATO allies have halted weapons exports to Turkey. That includes France and Germany. And with the US withdrawing from the border area, Russia says its military is now acting as a buffer between Turkish and Syrian troops. Also, the Kurds have they've spoken to Assad, Bashar al-Assad, and he has agreed to offer some sort of protection. So we'll see how that plays out. But Syria, the civil war that was happening in Syria was very much a proxy war. And with all of these updates, it's very clear that that proxy war continues. There are all these other world interests that are getting involved. You have Turkey involved, obviously. You have Russia, you have Iran. It's not a good situation at all. And it didn't have to go down this way. Trump just decided randomly after having a conversation to do this.
Although I really do wonder kind of what's in it for him, because he doesn't do anything without having a motivation. So I don't know what that conversation necessarily entailed, or what conversations he's having with Putin, or what other foreign leaders to essentially set himself up. So, maybe there'll be a Trump hotel on a new island somewhere.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. You're right. I mean, everything that he does is based on self-interest.
Yes.
And also whether or not the person he's speaking to is complimentary toward him. So a few more pieces of info that you should be aware of. How disastrous has this been for civilians in the area? Nearly 70,000 children have been displaced since hostilities escalated last week. And that's according to estimates by UNICEF, adding that 170,000 children may need humanitarian aid as a result of violence in the border region. But here's the issue, some of the organizations that have been offering humanitarian aid in the area have left because they're worried about their own lives given this Turkish aggression. Also, Kurds have announced that deal with the Russian and Iranian-backed government of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to back them against the Turkish onslaught. And finally, I want to read this quote from Donald Trump. This is a tweet that he posted. Let Syria and Assad protect the Kurds and fight Turkey for their own land. Anyone who wants to assist Syria in protecting the Kurds is good with me, whether it is Russia, China, or Napoleon. I hope they all do great. We are 7,000 miles away. But here's the thing. This is not an example of us doing an interventionist war. this was us working with the Kurds to defeat ISIS. And what Donald Trump did is basically throw them aside as soon as he got what he wanted.
Yeah, and it bears repeating that in that war against ISIS, the Kurds are the ones who bore the brunt of it. I mean, I think they lost something like 11,000 fighters in the fight against ISIS. Obviously way less than the United States suffered. And they were really the troops that were at the front lines fighting ISIS day in and day out, while at the same time doing a sort of very inspiring experiment in radical democracy, radical gender equality in the region. They had women were some of their top commanders in the militaries, also in the local governments and the sort of radically democratic governments that they established in the middle of this incredibly brutal and incredibly complex civil war, war against ISIS, Assad, the Turks, everything. Despite that, they were able to sort of build this kind of new type of society. And you wonder if that is going to survive now that they're forced to sort of throw themselves in the arms of Assad. It's just doubly heinous what the United States did, and it's one of the more depressing news developments that has happened all year.
Absolutely. So anytime you hear someone on the right, but specifically members of Trump's administration, claim that they're concerned about radical Islamic terrorism or they're worried about ISIS,
it's disingenuous.
It's so disingenuous.
They don't really care about that.
Right.
Radical Islamic terrorism is a net positive for the American right. Like it really is. They don't actually care about stopping it. They love to fight it forever.
They love to cite it as in their minds, a reason why they're better on national security and rooting out extremism compared to Democrats. But in reality, just based on Trump's actions alone, it's clear that they're disingenuous. It's clear that they use this and exploit it for their own political gain here in the United States. They don't genuinely worry or care about these insurgent groups or terrorism abroad, period.
And something else that really kind of just resonates with me as we saw those numbers of children, the hundreds of thousands of kids that are displaced or in need. Essentially, those kids are gonna grow up knowing that they were victimized, violated, essentially left and abandoned because of what the United States did. And so essentially, it's just creating more enemies. And that's something that Trump has continued to do, turn our allies into enemies and create new enemies for the United States that could come back against us decades later.
Yeah, look, I was in Vancouver, on vacation, although that vacation was cut short yesterday. But nonetheless, I just want to note that there was a big protest happening in front of a government building, and there were signs that specifically said America has blood on its hands.
That's right.
And it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing, and it feels terrible to know that this man, Donald Trump, represents us and the cruelty. And you're right, Nando. I mean, America has a history of cruelty abroad. Don't get me wrong, and doing things out of its own, self-interest and business interests. But Donald Trump's brazen disregard for human lives is embarrassing, and it makes it uncomfortable to be an American traveling abroad. And because we're full of jingoistic nonsense here. When you go abroad, you get a sense of what people really think about us, and I don't blame them. All right, I want to move on to a different angle to this story because Donald Trump and his family like to insult everyone's intelligence, so let's discuss that. Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, recently went on Fox News to defend Donald Trump's decision to abandon our Kurdish allies in northern Syria. Now, before we go to the video, let me just explain why this is an issue. The Kurds in northern Syria were assisting us and helping us in defeating ISIS, and they had been keeping an eye on ISIS fighters who had been imprisoned, right? So these prisons have all these literally tens of thousands of ISIS fighters. The Kurds are guarding them for us. And then Donald Trump has a conversation with the leader of Turkey, Erdogan, and Erdogan wants US troops out of that region. And that paves the way for Turkish aggression toward the Kurds. So effectively, Donald Trump has abandoned our allies who have helped us fight extremism abroad. With that said, take a look at what his daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, has to say about it.
President Trump's acquiescence to Turkey's move to send troops deep inside Syrian territory has in only 1 week's time turned into a bloody carnage, forced the abandonment of a successful 5-year-long American project to keep the peace on a volatile border, and given an unanticipated victory to 4 American adversaries: Russia, Iran, the Syrian government, and the Islamic State. Your response tonight?
Well, Shannon, I think we should start with the fact that if you ask the average American out there, I think they would have to Google who are the Kurds and why is America even over there fighting this war. If you saw him at the rally in Minneapolis the other night, you saw him tell a story about the hardest part of his job, and it's when our brave men and women are coming back home in caskets, and he has to be there to comfort their families. He never wants to see that happen, and it certainly should not be happening in a space where, quite frankly, we don't even belong as Americans. A lot of people don't even really understand why we were there.
So I didn't know who the Kurds were, and since I didn't know who the Kurds were, I'm just gonna assume that all other Americans are idiots and they have no idea what's going on abroad. That's what I think is going on. First of all, what is she even talking about, right? She offered nothing in that answer. And to be fair, I can't even believe I'm saying this, to Fox, they've done, not all of them, but some of the on-air commentators have done a decent job in calling Trump out on how much of a disaster this has been. But no, there wasn't a war in northern Syria, right? Until now. The troops were there as a deterrent when it came to Turkey's aggression. So they weren't in harm's way. They were preventing an uptick in violence, right? And they were there to protect our Kurdish allies who helped us fight ISIS in Syria. Just want to give that context. Go ahead.
Listen, normally I would support basically any troop withdrawal anywhere in the world that the United States did. I would support troop withdrawal from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, from Iraq. I would oppose any intervention in Venezuela or North Korea or any of these other places. But this is kind of the one limited instance in which American troop presence abroad was a positive force, right? I mean, with all the millions of caveats that you have to do, when you're dealing with American empire, you're always dealing with pretty nasty business. But in this one specific instance, it was kind of a net positive. And this is the one that they focus on doing first, and it's just really depressing, and it fits a pattern. I mean, that's why he was able to do it, because it fits a pattern in ongoing sort of U.S. abandonment of the Kurds that has happened time and time and again, and frankly, this sort of strange capitulation to Turkish aggression, which is it just baffles the mind, but. What can you say?
Yeah, and Laura Trump, these family members, Trumps, they're gangsters at gaslighting. All they do is kind of try to muddy the waters, pretend they don't know what's going on, so you should know what's going on. It's too much, and then try to simplify it in a false way. But essentially, it's unfortunate what is going on right now in northern Syria, because it really just speaks to the fact that, unfortunately, America seems to be really selfish. They got what they wanted, and now they left. And that really feeds the narrative of who we are as a people. And as you see everything going down, it's so self-interested.
Yes, you're absolutely right. But it goes even further than that, right? Because America might have gotten what it wanted in defeating ISIS, but it's not as if things can't go or things can't devolve or fall apart. And that's what's happening right now. You have ISIS fighters who are being guarded by the Kurds escaping those prisons right now as we speak. Because now the priority for the Kurds, which is the most understandable thing, is to save their own lives as a result of this Turkish aggression. And so their priority isn't guarding the ISIS fighters anymore. Their priority is to save their own lives. And so, I mean, when you really think about it, America got what it wanted very temporarily until you had an idiot like Donald Trump make a decision based on one phone call he had with the leader of Turkey. And we don't know exactly how that phone call played out. We don't know if there was any type of quid pro quo going on.
I think the phone call was beautiful. It was a perfect phone call.
Beautiful phone call.
It was a perfect, beautiful phone call.
It was the best. It was strong, very strong phone call. Well, strong phone call that has now led to a humanitarian crisis in that area, the death of civilians in that area, and also the escape of ISIS fighters in the area. So we all know how this is gonna play out. Don't allow members of Trump's administration to insult your intelligence on this. We got to take a break. When we come back, we're going to give you an update on impeachment-related news and other topics. We'll be back.
We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you want to get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to TYT. Nando and Adrienne join me for the first hour. And I want to read some of your comments. So let's start with member comments. I'm going to start with Chet's mom because I needed this comment today. So glad Anna's back.
Yes.
Love this panel.
All right now.
Thank you. I really appreciate that sweet comment. Women's, oh yeah, women's. But it's not spelled like women's, it's spelled differently with a Y. Okay. I firmly believe that the terrorist enemy was intended to be the enemy we never defeat, ensuring the necessity of financing the war effort into perpetuity. Perpetuity, yeah. I mean.
We'll always be at war with East Asia or whatever. That's the classic thing.
Fuels the economy.
Be a great dad, great handle, writes in, and these are member comments, by the way. I think this was a gift to the military-industrial complex. Our members are freaking smart, man. The destabilized Middle East is a profitable Middle East. It's also a huge distraction to the exposure of the Democrat and Republican corruption if you view Trump, Biden, and now Pelosi family antics profiting off their positions.
The richest county in the United States per capita is where the Pentagon is.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Sounds right.
Good trivia for you, for one of those bar night trivia nights at a bar. Thomas says, I love Nando's input on subjects. It's a shame that he can't get a word in edgewise, nor can anyone else.
What does that mean?
When Cenk is on.
Oh.
At first I was like, hey,
true.
wait a minute, and then when Cenk is on. Okay.
That's not true.
I know, I want to make sure that I give you guys as many opportunities to share your opinions. And then a few TYT lives on Twitter. A Belzo writes in, everyone knew that Turkey would attack the Kurds. Why didn't Trump know? I thought he was a super genius with unmatched wisdom. Well, Trump did know. The White House admitted that Trump knew.
Yeah.
Which is why he pulled the troops out. It's incredible. Anyway, few other notices for you guys. So as you know, we have some partners, and one of those partners happens to be a company called Doe. So look, investing is tricky, it's scary. I wasn't interested in it until fairly recently.
Wow. Yeah. Buy low, sell high, that's what you gotta do.
I know. Easier said than done, by the way,
what?
Right? Like if you're not an expert on investing, it's scary stuff. But Doe is a great partner for us to have because they make investing easy. So what they do is they'll ask you some questions about what your interests are, and then based on that survey, they will give you investing suggestions. So if you're interested, please check out the app. Go to doe.com/TYT and just go through the process. It's awesome. And they have 0 account minimums. That's pretty hard to find these days.
Nice.
Yep. I know like Charles Schwab has like a $5 grand one. They might have changed, I don't know.
Those fancy lads over at Charles Schwab. Doe.com, the people's investment firm.
Exactly, and then one other partner that I've talked about quite a bit on this show, you should be protecting your online activity with a VPN. NordVPN is one of the companies that we've partnered with, and they're wonderful because they give you a giant discount in addition to being one of the top VPN companies. You get a 70% off deal for 3 years, by the way, and you get your first month free. Go to nordvpn.com/TYT. And then finally, some programming notes. Marianne Williamson will be joining the conversation soon. So check that out tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, 5:30 Pacific. You can tune in live at tyt.com/live.
Wow, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
All righty, so let's get to the rest of the news. All right. It's just nonstop. Former White House aide Fiona Hill testified before Congress in a closed-door deposition. And based on individuals who were in the room and who are familiar with how that deposition went, we have some idea of John Bolton's conversations within the White House when he was serving as the National Security Advisor. Now, as we all know, he's no longer serving as a National Security Advisor or the National Security Advisor, but Bolton had some severe issues with the fact that Donald Trump and his cronies were attempting to dig up dirt on political rivals like Joe Biden, using the help of foreign countries like Ukraine. So based on what Fiona Hill told Congress, At one point, Bolton said the following about Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump's personal lawyer. Quote, Giuliani's a hand grenade who's going to blow everybody up. It's kind of true.
It's very true.
I got no love for Bolton.
No.
Right? Lots of problems with Bolton, but he's right in this prediction.
Oh, absolutely. There are CNN clips to establish that. Oh, he's so off.
He's definitely awful. So Bolton was concerned about Trump's efforts to dig up dirt on his political rival, Joe Biden, and also his son Hunter Biden. And this led to a conflict in the White House. So Bolton got into a tense exchange on July 10th. That was only 15 days before Trump had that phone call with Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine. Now on July 10th, Bolton got into a tense exchange with Gordon Sondland, the Trump donor turned ambassador to the EU, who was working with Giuliani to press Ukraine to investigate Democrats. And that's according to 3 people who heard Hill's testimony yesterday. In fact, Fiona Hill testified that Bolton told her to notify the chief lawyer for the National Security Council about a rogue effort by Sondland, Giuliani, and Mick Mulvaney, the acting White House chief of staff. Oh my, I think the person I want to see pay consequences, almost as much as I want to see Trump pay the consequences, Mick Mulvaney.
Yeah.
It'd be very nice.
Yeah.
So before I go on to the rest of the news on this, give you more details, what do you guys think?
Okay, I mean, I have no illusions that Bolton actually cares about any of this. Like, I don't think he on principle believes that Trump would be abusing his power by asking Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden. I really don't believe that he cares about that at all. I think that Bolton probably found himself ostracized within the administration because Trump wasn't sufficiently hawkish enough for him on Venezuela, on North Korea, on Iran, on a variety of things in which John Bolton is the most extreme hawkish version of whatever issue is on the table. And because Trump was not, 100 on the 0 to 100 scale of hawkishness, Bolton found himself ostracized and is probably just doing this to, blow up the administration in some way, which, it's fun to watch. I'm loving it. I'm enjoying but I really don't want to be on the same team as John Bolton.
No, I get it.
Is one of the worst people in American history.
I think you're right. Intentions matter, and what drove, the protests within the administration. I mean, this is pretty late in the game. Bolton was obviously already having issues with Trump, so I think that your theory is, I think there's a lot of credibility to that theory. By the way, Hill said Bolton also said in regard to the conversations with Ukraine, I'm not part of whatever drug deal Sondland and Mulvaney are cooking up, Bolton told Hill to tell White House lawyers, and that's according to 2 people who were at the deposition. Adrienne?
Yeah, no, I actually think that Bolton, he was definitely okay with it, but what he wasn't okay with was bringing in people who aren't as clean and getting it done. Because it's one of those things where these people don't mind necessarily criminality. It's just, are we gonna bring on sloppy parties who are gonna get us caught and in trouble? And as we see Giuliani out here on television, breaking privilege, just talking all this nonsense and essentially just being messy, Bolton's a lot cleaner in his dirt, and he's not trying to get caught. And so I think he got scared, and he's like, "I'm good."
That's true. I think that's a good point. Yeah, he's also he probably Bolton was at Yale, went to Yale Law School. Like he's no dummy. He's a monster, but he's no dummy. And he probably thought, oh, this whole Ukraine thing is super illegal, and I don't want any part of it. And so he's probably saving his skin. But
I don't think that illegality bothered him. It's that you don't bring in a messy person. It's like if we were gonna do a heist and you brought in, I don't know, Uncle Lou, who doesn't really know anything or really care. I'm not trying to stick out my neck to bring on someone who's just gonna end up dragging us down and getting us caught. Right. And so I think that was Bolton's idea.
Well, speaking of messiness, let's hear from Rudy Giuliani. He spoke to the Daily Beast following news of what Bolton had said within the administration. And his quote is, I have not spoken to John about his comments as conveyed by Hill. John is a longtime friend. I have no idea why John is doing this. My best guess is that he's confused. This is so funny. My best guess is that he's confused and bought into a false media narrative without bothering to call me about it. He's accusing others of being confused. And we've seen his interviews, which I personally enjoy watching.
Yeah, and that's something that this administration loves to do. They like to do this confusion. I don't know why. I have no idea. Everything's a shoulder shrugs. It's a playing dumb thing. So essentially it's saying, I don't recall, so you can't tie me to anything. And that's what they love to do.
And it's amazing to think that like circa 2006, Giuliani was like maybe the most popular politician in America. And had he just kind of like receded from the front lines and just kind of told stories about 9/11, he would have just had a nice career making bajillions of dollars in speaking fees, and his reputation would be intact. Instead, he decided to come back into the fray, and his reputation is in tatters. And you know what? You love to see it.
I definitely love to see it. But you know what? He has this characteristic that a lot of criminals have.
Yeah.
And that characteristic is greed, right? Like that greed is usually what gets people caught in the end, right? When you've done things and gotten away with it, like move on with your life. But no, he's a questionable figure to say the least. Now he is refusing to cooperate with this House investigation, even though he has been subpoenaed. So he is not going to cooperate, and really the ball is in the Democrats' court in regard to what they're gonna do if he refuses to cooperate with this investigation. I mean, a subpoena is a subpoena, and there have been strong words by Democrats in regard to individuals who refuse to comply with those subpoenas. But we've seen Democrats, like talk is cheap. We need to see them actually hold individuals in contempt if they're not following through with what they're legally supposed to do. Also, Hill testified that she opposed the idea of Donald Trump having that call with Vladimir Zelensky on July 25th because she did not understand its purpose. While it was described as a congratulatory call following parliamentary elections in Ukraine, Trump had already made a congratulatory call to Zelensky in April. So she felt that things were strange. She had problems with what was going on, and it is important that people like her do comply with this investigation and speak to Congress. Now, what can we look forward to? Who else will testify? There are members of Trump's administration who are not listening to the State Department. They are gonna cooperate with the investigation. Gordon Sondland is one of those people. He's the EU ambassador. Then you have George Kent, Deputy Secretary of State, and Laura Cooper, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. So those are three individuals who are gonna be testifying before Congress soon. And everything that's been going on has led Trump to be a little more insular. So he is very suspicious and paranoid. He doesn't trust anyone. He thinks that Bolton was one of the White House leakers, which could possibly be true, right? Why not? And according to the Daily Beast, in the course of casual conversations with advisors and friends, Trump has privately raised suspicions that a spiteful John Bolton could be one of the sources behind the flood of leaks against him. At one point, one of those sources recalled Trump guessed that Bolton was behind one of the anonymous accounts that listed the former national security advisor as one of the top officials most disturbed by the Ukraine-related efforts of Trump and Rudy Giuliani.
Yeah. I have a question. You're a legal scholar, right?
Yes.
What happens if like Mike Pence, as is being reported, is refusing to comply with a subpoena? Can like Congress like order like people with guns to arrest him? Like what happens if he's like no, and then they order like what happens in that scenario?
To my recollection, they can seek to enforce it, and it's kind of similar to a court subpoena where you can be held accountable for it. So, but I don't necessarily know the lengths they would have to go to actually enforce it if they need to put in a vote of some kind of measure. But I think what we all kind of notice and know is that essentially Giuliani and the rest of the gang, they're just calling their bluff and saying you're not going to do anything because you've never done anything before. And essentially too many people that we're in bed with put money in your pockets, so you ain't gonna do nothing.
We'll see how that goes. But if they show weakness on that issue, it's just not gonna look good because it gives you a sense of how the rest of this impeachment investigation is gonna go. Things are moving quickly. We're learning more and more about what was going on within the White House, but that information means nothing if Democrats don't act on it.
That's right.
Right? Yep. So one other Giuliani-related story, and then we'll take a break. New reporting indicates that Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, was paid $500,000 for the work that he did for a Ukrainian-American businessman, Lev Parnas, who was one of the individuals arrested last week as part of this impeachment investigation. Now, Lev Parnas and his business associate, Uygur Fruman, were arrested on campaign finance charges.
It's real lookers.
That is very unprogressive of you.
Sorry.
Okay,
I didn't mean to body
No,
shame
I don't mind at all. I'm just kidding. I'm just giving you a hard time. Now, let me give you more information on Lev Parnas. He's a close associate of Giuliani and was involved in his effort to investigate Trump's political rival, former Vice President Joe Biden. Also, both Parnas and Fruman were arrested at Dulles Airport outside Washington last week on charges that they funneled foreign money to unnamed US politicians in a bid to influence US-Ukraine relations in violation of US campaign finance laws. The men were preparing to board a plane to Europe. Now, $500,000 is a lot of money. Giuliani's in bed with these guys. They've just been arrested, so the walls are closing in on Giuliani. But he has said that he will not comply or cooperate with any congressional subpoena.
Yeah, and if they're not going to do anything and it's just for show, I understand why he's not going to do it. The thing I find to be extremely interesting is how his former office, the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, how they're investigating him, and the thought that he could be hauled in, at an office he used to lead, that really I think that's when it might hit home for him, like it kind of did Michael Cohen.
That's a really good point. I mean, look, there have been individuals who faced the consequences for getting involved and rolling around the dirt with Donald Trump. So I don't think it's far-fetched for him to deal with those consequences. And we all know how Donald Trump would deal with that situation. He'd abandon them immediately. He doesn't care about Giuliani. He doesn't care about anyone other than himself. Now let me give you more details on what was going on in terms of some of this funding. By May of 2018, a pro-Trump super PAC reported receiving a $325,000 donation from an energy company that these two individuals, Parnas and Fruman, recently formed. Where Parnas and Fruman got their money, though, remains a mystery. When they were arrested on charges of campaign finance violations, prosecutors alleged that they were both backed in part by an unnamed Russian national who used them to funnel donations to state and federal candidates.
Yeah. Such a great idea to pass Citizens United and make it basically impossible to track where these political donations come from. This kind of thing happens so much more than we realize. Whether it's from the Gulf or from shady Ukrainian interests or from Chinese oligarchs or whatever, there is so much money sloshing around this American political system because of that. That it's just you sort of see little bits and pieces every once in a while, and it just boggles the mind the amount of money that's flowing through it in deals like this.
Well, which is why the way it's not just Citizens United; it's the protections that allow for dark money to fund candidates, right? And so whenever you hear the right lose it over someone like Joaquin Castro disclosing who political donors are, just understand that they're not doing anything other than trying to protect this type of disgusting corruption that takes place.
Yeah, these three goons are just like the dummies that got caught.
Right.
The real smart ones, they're getting away with it all the time.
Absolutely.
And then all of a sudden, everything that we do in the United States is really governed by maybe some foreign power or foreign interest or corporate. And hey, all the decisions made for us, whether it's, EPA regulations, everything.
Yeah.
We got to take a break. When we come back, Hunter Biden speaks. He had a lengthy interview with ABC. We're going to show you some of those highlights and more when we return.